Dr. Blue couldn't believe what he was seeing. His four eyes blinked rapidly as he stared at the medical data displayed on the massive screen. The gathered medical experts at the Galactic Medical Conference sat in stunned silence, their various appendages frozen in shock. "Could you please repeat that last part?" Dr. Blue asked, his voice trembling slightly. The human standing at the podium nodded politely. "Of course," Dr. Smith said, pointing at the X-ray images. "As you can see, when a human bone breaks, it naturally fuses back together over time. We call this process healing." The conference room erupted in chaos. Medical experts from 50 different species started talking at once. Some stood up, others fell back in their seats, and a few simply turned various shades of their species' respective colors of distress. "Impossible," shouted a tentacled doctor from the third row. "Structural damage cannot simply repair itself." Dr. Smith scratched his head, looking confused at the reaction. "Well, it does take a few weeks, and we usually need to set the bone properly first." "Weeks?" Dr. Blue interrupted. "Not months. Not years." "No, just weeks," Dr. Smith confirmed. "Though bigger breaks might take a couple of months." A low-gravity species representative actually floated out of their seat in shock. "And this? Healing. Does it work for all humans?" "Yes, all humans can heal broken bones. It's a basic function of our biology." The room fell silent again. Dr. Blue quickly tapped on his data pad, adding another entry to his growing list of concerning human biological abilities. This was the fourth time in the past hour he'd had to update it. "Let me make sure I understand," Dr. Blue said carefully. "You're saying that if a human's internal support structure is damaged, the body will automatically begin repairs, create new structural material, and restore full functionality." "That's correct," Dr. Smith replied. "Though we usually try to avoid breaking bones in the first place. It's quite painful." "Pain," exclaimed another alien doctor. "You mean you maintain consciousness during structural damage?" "Well, yes. It hurts a lot, but most of us stay conscious unless the injury is severe." More frantic note-taking ensued. Dr. Blue watched as his colleagues' appendages shook while documenting this terrifying information. He decided to move the presentation forward before someone fainted. "Perhaps we should move on to the next topic," he suggested. "Dr. Smith, you mentioned something about your species' external protective layer. Skin, was it?" "Oh yes," Dr. Smith brightened, pulling up a new slide. "Human skin is quite remarkable. When damaged, it can repair itself too. Small cuts typically heal in days, while larger wounds might take a few weeks." The room erupted again. A medical expert from the crystalline species shattered their outer shell in shock and had to be escorted out. "And this? Skin. It covers your entire body?" Dr. Blue asked, dreading the answer. "Yes, it's our largest organ." "Organ?" Several alien doctors shouted in unison. Dr. Smith looked increasingly confused by the reactions. "Is self-repairing skin unusual?" Dr. Blue took a deep breath, trying to maintain his professional composure. "Doctor, in most civilized species, when a body part is damaged, it stays damaged. That's why we developed medical technology." "Are you saying humans develop medical technology despite having natural healing abilities?" "Well, of course. Natural healing isn't perfect. Sometimes we need help to heal properly. Plus, there are lots of things our bodies can't heal on their own." The revelation that humans had limits provided some small comfort to the assembled doctors. Dr. Blue made a note to investigate these limitations in detail later. "One final question," Dr. Blue said. "These healing abilities, are they recent developments? Perhaps from genetic engineering?" Dr. Smith laughed. "No, we've always been this way. It's completely natural." The conference room descended into chaos once again. 3 more doctors had to be escorted out. Someone started crying in a corner. Dr. Blue looked at his data pad, then at the human standing calmly at the podium, then back at his data pad. He had a feeling this was going to be a very long conference, and somewhere in the back of his mind, He wondered what other terrifying surprises human biology had in store for them. "Perhaps," he said weakly, "we should take a short break before continuing." Dr. Smith nodded agreeably. "Good idea. I could use some coffee." Dr. Blue didn't know what coffee was, but given everything else he'd learned about humans today, he was afraid to ask. The emergency alarms on Station Alpha 7 blared just 3 hours after the conference's morning break. Dr. Blue rushed to the observation deck, all 4 of his eyes wide with concern. The station's primary reactor was having problems, and the maintenance crew needed to fix it before things got worse. "Status report." He called out to the station's safety officer. "The human maintenance team is already inside the reactor chamber," the officer replied, gesturing to the monitoring screens. Dr. Blue froze. The radiation levels in that chamber were far above safe limits for most species. He grabbed his medical scanner and rushed to the observation window, expecting to see the humans collapse at any moment. Instead, what he saw made him question everything he knew about biology. Through the reinforced window, he watched as 3 human engineers worked calmly on the reactor. Their movements were steady and focused, even though his scanner showed they were accumulating radiation damage. According to all known medical science, they should have been incapacitated already. "How long have they been in there?" he asked, his voice shaking. "About 20 minutes, the officer replied. "They say they need another 30 to fix the problem." Just then, one of the humans slipped on a loose panel. She fell hard, hitting her arm against a metal railing. Dr. Blue's scanner immediately showed a hairline fracture in her radius bone. He reached for the emergency evacuation controls, but before he could activate them, something impossible happened. The human got up, shook her arm, and went right back to work. Did she just ignore structural damage and continue functioning? Dr. Blue asked nobody in particular. The safety officer, who had worked with humans before, just shrugged. Humans do that sometimes. They call it walking it off. Dr. Blue frantically added another entry to his research notes. Humans can apparently choose to ignore serious injury if they decide the task at hand is more important. The next 30 minutes were the longest of Dr. Blue's career. He watched in horror and fascination as the human team completed their repairs. The injured engineer even helped carry heavy equipment with her broken arm, something that should have been physically impossible. When the humans finally emerged from the reactor chamber, Dr. Blue rushed to examine them with his medical scanner. All 3 showed signs of radiation exposure, minor burns, and various cuts and bruises. The female engineer's arm was definitely broken, yet they were all walking and talking normally. "You need immediate medical attention," he insisted, pointing his scanner at them. "Nah, we're fine," said the engineer with the broken arm. "Though some ice would be nice, and maybe some painkillers. But your structural support is compromised." Dr. Blue protested. "It's just a small break," she replied, as if discussing a minor inconvenience rather than serious bodily harm. "It'll heal." The casual way she said this made Dr. Blue's own bones ache in sympathy. He insisted on taking them to the medical bay anyway, more to satisfy his own scientific curiosity than anything else. As he treated their radiation exposure and set the broken arm, he couldn't help but notice that the humans were already showing signs of recovery. Their bodies were actively fighting the radiation damage. Their small cuts were clotting, and the broken bone was already showing the first signs of that terrifying process they called healing. "How are you not in severe distress?" he finally asked. The humans looked at each other and shrugged. "We've had worse," one of them said. Dr. Blue added another note to his research. Humans can apparently compare levels of damage and dismiss current injuries based on comparison to previous injuries. This suggests they regularly survive multiple damage events during their lifetime. Later that evening, as he prepared his report for the Galactic Medical Board, Dr. Blue struggled to find the right words to describe what he'd witnessed. How could he explain a species that treated broken bones as minor inconveniences, that could function through radiation exposure, That could ignore pain if they decided something else was more important. He finally settled on a simple summary. Human damage resistance exceeds all known biological limits. Their ability to continue functioning while injured defies current medical understanding. Further research is urgently needed, preferably from a safe distance. As he finished his report, he heard the humans in the break room next door laughing and joking about their exciting day. One of them was even arm wrestling with their good arm while their broken one was healing. Dr. Blue decided he needed a long rest and maybe a career change. The life support systems on Station Alpha 7 were still giving trouble 3 days after the reactor incident. Dr. Blue wandered into the station's common area at what humans called 3M, hoping to find some peace and quiet to update his research notes. Instead, he found something that would haunt his nightmares forever. He watched in horror as Dr. Smith and the maintenance crew gathered around a machine that was producing a dark, steaming liquid. The humans were consuming it in large quantities, and their behavior was becoming increasingly concerning. "Is that poison?" Dr. Blue asked, his medical scanner already out and running. "This." Dr. Smith held up his cup. "It's just coffee. Want some?" Dr. Blue's scanner finished its analysis, and all 4 of his eyes widened in shock. "This substance contains multiple toxins, and you're willingly consuming it." "Oh yeah," one of the engineers said, already on her 4th cup. "Can't work these long shifts without it. Anyone want to make a new pot?" Dr. Blue frantically took notes. Humans intentionally consume toxic stimulants to alter their body chemistry. They appear to enjoy this. The scanner showed the caffeine was already affecting their systems. Their heart rates were elevated, brain activity was increasing, and their metabolic rates were far above normal. Yet instead of dying, they seemed to be becoming more energetic. "How long have you been awake?" Dr. Blue asked, noticing the dark circles under their eyes. "About 30 hours, Dr. Smith replied cheerfully, sipping more coffee. "But we've got at least another 12 to go before the life support is fully stabilized." 30 hours, without entering hibernation or stasis. "We call it sleep," the engineer corrected. "And yeah, we can stay awake pretty long if we need to." "The coffee helps." Dr. Blue's appendages trembled as he added another note. "Humans can intentionally delay their rest cycle using chemical stimulants. They consider this normal." Just then, another human walked in with a different beverage can. "Anyone want an energy drink?" he asked. "I found some in storage." The humans cheered. Dr. Blue scanned the new beverage and nearly fainted. The chemical composition was even more potent than the coffee. "That contains even more stimulants," he protested. "And something called taurine. Yeah, it gives you wings." One human joked, while the others laughed. Dr. Blue didn't understand the reference, but he was too horrified by their casual attitude toward consuming multiple toxic substances to ask for clarification. The next 12 hours were a blur of increasing panic as he observed the humans working on the life support systems. They kept drinking coffee and energy drinks, their movements becoming faster, but somehow still precise. His scanner showed their bodies should be shutting down from stimulant overdose and sleep deprivation, but they just kept going. More disturbing was their behavior. The longer they stayed awake, the more they laughed at things that weren't funny. They started making references to something called memes and occasionally burst into synchronized songs about being still alive. "This is a normal human stress response," he asked the station's safety officer. "Oh yes," the officer replied. "They get a bit weird after 30 hours without sleep, but they're still surprisingly functional. Just wait until they hit the 40-hour mark. That's when they start getting really creative with their problem solving." Dr. Blue didn't want to wait for that. He quickly updated his report to the Galactic Medical Board. URGENT. Humans have discovered how to weaponize their own biochemistry. They intentionally consume toxic substances to enhance their capabilities and can remain operational for extended periods without rest. Most concerning, They appear to enjoy this. Finally, after 42 hours, the life support systems were fixed. The humans celebrated by consuming something they called energy drink coffee mix, which made Dr. Blue's scanner short-circuit in protest. As the humans finally headed off to sleep, Dr. Blue added one final note to his research. Human chemical resistance suggests their species evolved on a death world where everything was trying to kill them. This explains much, but raises disturbing questions about their planet of origin. He then locked his research notes in a secure container and went to lie down in a quiet room. He needed to process what he'd seen. Maybe this was all just a hallucination from stress. But the empty coffee cups in the common area suggested otherwise. The environmental control systems on Station Alpha 7 were having another bad day. This time, the temperature regulators had failed completely. Some sections of the station were freezing, while others were hot enough to cook food. Dr. Blue stared at the emergency readings in despair. Most species would need immediate evacuation. The temperature variations were far too extreme for safe operation. "Don't worry," Dr. Smith said, pulling on what he called the jacket in the cold sections and rolling up his sleeves in the hot ones. "We can handle this." "Handle this?" Dr. Blue's translator nearly glitched trying to convey his disbelief. "The temperature range is over 40 degrees. "Yeah, it's not great," Dr. Smith admitted. "But humans can work in much worse." Dr. Blue watched in amazement as the human maintenance team spread out through the station. They seemed completely unbothered by temperature changes that would kill most species. His medical scanner was working overtime trying to understand how they did it. In the freezing sections, their bodies simply generated more heat. In the hot sections, they produced something called sweat that Dr. Blue initially mistook for their bodies melting. "Are you leaking?" he asked one engineer who was dripping with sweat. "Oh, this?" The engineer wiped his forehead. "It's how we cool down. The evaporation helps regulate our temperature." Dr. Blue quickly added to his notes. Humans can actively control their internal temperature through multiple biological mechanisms. They appear to be walking environmental control units. But the real shock came when the team had to repair the station's outer hull. A small meteor had damaged one of the panels, and it needed immediate fixing. The area had no temperature control at all. "You can't go out there," Dr. Blue protested. "The temperature swings in space are hundreds of degrees. That's why we have spacesuits," Dr. Smith explained, already putting one on. "They're not very comfortable, but they work." But what about the pressure differences?" "Oh, we can handle some pressure changes. Not raw space, obviously, but quite a bit of variation is fine. Did you know humans regularly climb mountains on Earth for fun? The pressure drops quite a bit up there." Dr. Blue's appendages went limp with shock. "You deliberately seek out pressure changes for entertainment?" "Sure. We also dive deep underwater where the pressure increases. Some people do both in the same week." The next few hours were a blur of increasing amazement as Dr. Blue watched the humans work. They moved between different temperature zones without pause. They handled pressure changes that should have caused serious damage. They kept working even when the humidity reached levels that made other species' environmental suits short-circuit. Most shocking was their casual attitude about it all. They treated these environmental extremes like minor inconveniences rather than the deadly threats they were. "Reminds me of summer back home," one engineer said while working in a section that was nearly hot enough to boil water. "Yeah, but the cold parts are nothing compared to winter in Canada," another replied from a section cold enough to freeze most liquids. Dr. Blue frantically updated his research notes. Humans appear to be environmentally adaptable to a degree that suggests their home world has multiple climate zones, of which they have survived all of them. The repairs took 6 hours. By the end, the humans were tired but triumphant. They had fixed both the hull breach and the environmental controls, working in conditions that would have killed most species in minutes. "Pretty rough day," Dr. Smith said, wiping sweat from his face. "Anyone up for a sauna?" "What's a sauna?" Dr. Blue asked, dreading the answer. Oh, it's a room we heat up really hot on purpose and sit in it to relax. Dr. Blue stared at him in horror. You create hostile environments. For fun. Well, yeah. And then sometimes we jump into freezing water afterward. It's refreshing. That evening, Dr. Blue sent a new urgent update to the Galactic Medical Board. Important. Humans are not simply tolerant of environmental extremes. They actively seek them out for entertainment. This suggests a level of environmental adaptability previously thought impossible in evolved beings. Recommendation: classify humans as environmentally indestructible and update all survival guidelines accordingly. He then went to his quarters, set the temperature to exactly optimal for his species, and tried very hard not to think about humans voluntarily jumping between hot and cold extremes for fun. Some things were just too terrifying to contemplate. After the environmental control crisis, Dr. Blue decided to take a break from his human research. He needed time to process everything he'd learned. Unfortunately, his break lasted exactly 12 minutes, the time it took him to walk to the station's recreation area and discover something even more disturbing. Through the observation window, he saw Dr. Smith repeatedly lifting and lowering heavy metal objects. The human's face was red, sweat poured down his body, and his muscles were clearly under strain. Security, Dr. Blue called out in panic. Someone is torturing the human. No, the station's safety officer quickly explained. He's exercising. Humans do this voluntarily. Dr. Blue's 4 eyes blinked in confusion. They deliberately damage themselves. They call it getting swole, the officer said, having learned far too much about humans during his posting. Dr. Blue watched in horror as more humans entered the recreation area. Some began running on moving platforms that went nowhere. Others were doing something called push-ups that seemed designed to strain every muscle in their bodies. One particularly frightening human was hitting a hanging bag with their fists repeatedly. His medical scanner was going crazy trying to track all the voluntary damage the humans were inflicting on themselves. "Excuse me," he said to a human who had just finished running nowhere for 30 minutes. "Why are you doing this?" "Oh, got to stay in shape," she replied, wiping sweat from her face. "If you don't use your muscles, they get weak. Got to tear them down to build them up stronger." Dr. Blue's appendages trembled as he made a new note. Humans deliberately damage their muscles to make them stronger. Their bodies respond to damage by becoming more resilient. This suggests their entire biology is based on becoming stronger through trauma. Just then, Dr. Smith finished his weight lifting and walked over, drinking something from a container. "Want to try some protein shake?" he offered. "It helps build muscle after a workout." Dr. Blue scanned the drink and nearly dropped his medical device. "This contains processed organic matter." "Yeah, mostly whey protein. Need it to build back the muscle tissue that gets broken down during exercise." "You break down your muscles on purpose?" "Well, yeah. How else would you get stronger?" Dr. Blue watched in fascinated horror as more humans arrived for their workout routines. Some were doing movements called squats that seemed designed to strain their entire structural support system. Others were hanging from bars and pulling themselves up repeatedly, fighting against their planet's own gravity. Most disturbing were the sounds they made: grunting, groaning, and occasionally shouting encouragement to each other as they voluntarily underwent what any other species would consider torture. "No pain, no gain," one human yelled to another. Dr. Blue quickly added another note. "Humans have developed ritualistic pain encouragement chants for their voluntary damage sessions." The horror continued as he learned about different workout programs. Humans had apparently developed hundreds of different ways to systematically damage themselves for improvement. They called them things like CrossFit, height, and leg day. The last one seemed particularly dreaded yet respected. "And you do this regularly?" he asked Dr. Smith. "Try to hit the gym at least 3 times a week," Smith replied. "Been a bit lazy lately, though. Some people do it every day." Dr. Blue's translator briefly shut down trying to process the concept of doing this daily. When it rebooted, he found himself watching a human doing something called planking that seemed to involve fighting gravity with their entire body at once. His final report to the Galactic Medical Board that evening was short. URGNTUPDAT. Humans have weaponized their own healing factor. They deliberately cause controlled damage to their bodies, which then rebuild stronger than before. This process appears to have no upper limit. Conclusion: humans are technically biological self-upgrading units. As he finished his report, he heard cheering from the recreation area. Someone had achieved a personal best in their voluntary damage routine. Dr. Blue decided to find a new career, perhaps something safe, like volcanic gas farming or antimatter containment. Anything would be less terrifying than watching humans deliberately evolve through controlled trauma. After a week of observing human physical capabilities, Dr. Blue was assigned to study human mental processes. The Galactic Medical Board wanted to understand how humans coped with their terrifying biological abilities. They sent their best xenopsychologist, Dr. Green, to assist. "Let's start with something simple," Dr. Green said, setting up monitoring equipment in the station's psychology lab. "We'll show them images that trigger stress responses." Dr. Blue watched as human volunteers were shown pictures of various dangerous situations. To their surprise, the humans didn't just process the fear, they analyzed it. "Oh, that's a bad way to climb a mountain," one human said, looking at a particularly scary image. "They should have used different safety gear. I could show them a better technique." Dr. Green's recording tentacles twitched in confusion. "They don't just feel fear, they problem-solve during it." "Fascinating," Dr. Blue muttered, taking notes. Humans use fear as a learning tool. But the real surprise came during the social interaction tests. The humans were introduced to various alien species, including some that most races found naturally terrifying. "What an interesting defense mechanism," one human exclaimed, admiring the toxic spines of a particularly dangerous-looking alien. "Do they change color when you're happy? They're beautiful." Dr. Green's monitoring equipment nearly overloaded. They're not just overcoming their fear. They're genuinely curious about things that should terrify them. The tests continued, revealing more disturbing patterns. When faced with problems, humans didn't just seek solutions. They looked for multiple ways to solve them, often inventing new approaches on the spot. "It's like their minds never stop," Dr. Green whispered to Dr. Blue. "They're constantly thinking, analyzing, adapting. And the strangest part," Dr. Blue added, "is how they share these abilities with others." They watched as the humans began teaching each other new skills they had just learned. More surprisingly, they started teaching the alien test administrators too. No, you're overthinking it," one human told a crystalline being who was struggling with a puzzle. "Sometimes you just need to trust your instincts." Dr. Blue quickly added to his notes. "Humans not only solve problems but actively seek to help others solve them too. They appear to gain satisfaction from teaching." The emotional tests were even more revealing. Humans showed an ability to feel multiple emotions at once, something that caused Dr. Green's equipment to need recalibration 3 times. "They can be scared and excited at the same time?" Dr. Green asked in disbelief. "Happy and sad simultaneously. And they call it normal," Dr. Blue replied, watching the human explain the concept of bittersweet to a confused alien researcher. But the most shocking discovery came during the stress endurance tests. The humans were given seemingly impossible problems to solve with very short deadlines. Instead of breaking down, they got creative. They formed teams, shared jokes to lighten the mood, and somehow performed better under pressure. One group even started singing while solving complex equations. "Are they enjoying this?" Dr. Green asked, watching the humans tackle increasingly difficult challenges with growing enthusiasm. "Humans appear to be emotionally strengthened by overcoming difficulties," Dr. Blue noted. "Just like their physical response to exercise, their minds seem to grow stronger when challenged." The final test involved isolating humans for short periods. Instead of becoming distressed, they use the time to think, plan, or simply rest. Some even called it peaceful. They can entertain themselves with just their thoughts. Dr. Green's recording tentacles were practically tied in knots trying to document this phenomenon. Dr. Blue's report to the Galactic Medical Board that evening was his longest yet. Human psychological resilience matches their physical capabilities. They can process multiple emotional states simultaneously, adapt to new situations rapidly, and actually grow stronger from mental challenges. Most concerning, they actively seek out new challenges once they've mastered existing ones. He added a personal note. Their ability to form bonds with any species, combined with their problem-solving abilities and emotional resilience, makes them both terrifying and invaluable. Recommendation: classify humans as psychologically unique and begin studying their teaching methods immediately. As he finished his report, he heard laughter from the testing area. The humans had organized an impromptu party to celebrate completing all the tests and had somehow convinced several alien researchers to join in. They're not just surviving, Dr. Green observed, watching the unlikely gathering. They're helping everyone else thrive too. Dr. Blue nodded, adding one final note. Perhaps this is the most remarkable thing about human biology. It's contagious in the best possible way. The main conference hall of the Galactic Medical Board was packed. Representatives from hundreds of species had gathered to hear Dr. Blue's final presentation on human biology. The room buzzed with nervous energy. Everyone had read his preliminary reports, and nobody quite knew what to think. Dr. Blue stood at the podium, his 4 eyes scanning the crowd. Dr. Smith sat in the front row, calmly sipping something called hot chocolate, which Dr. Blue had stopped scanning for toxins weeks ago. Distinguished colleagues, Dr. Blue began, I stand before you today to present my findings on human biology. I must warn you, what I'm about to share will challenge everything we know about biological life. He activated the main display, showing a series of images from his research. First, humans can repair severe structural damage naturally. He showed the X-rays of healed bones. Gasps filled the room. Yes, I know, but that's just the beginning. He clicked to the next slide. They intentionally damaged their muscles to make them stronger. The footage from the exercise room caused several delegates to cover their visual organs in horror. They can survive extreme temperature variations, he continued, showing the environment control incident, and sometimes seek out these extremes for entertainment. A crystalline being in the back row shattered in shock. Nobody noticed. They were too focused on the presentation. Their endurance capabilities exceed all known limits, Dr. Blue said, showing footage of humans working through injuries. They can remain functional while damaged and operate on minimal rest using chemical stimulants they call coffee. Dr. Smith raised his cup in acknowledgement, causing nearby aliens to lean away nervously. But perhaps most remarkably, Dr. Blue continued, their psychological resilience matches their physical capabilities. They don't just survive challenges, they actively seek them out. They learn from fear, grow stronger from stress, and somehow maintain multiple emotional states simultaneously. He paused, letting this sink in. In short, everything about human biology appears to be designed for constant improvement through adversity. They don't just heal, they come back stronger. They don't just survive, they adapt and thrive. The room was silent now, every being focused on his words. My original question was, what's wrong with human biology? But I've come to realize I was asking the wrong question. Nothing is wrong with human biology. It's simply optimized for something we never considered: continuous advancement through controlled adversity. Dr. Blue clicked to his final slide, showing humans teaching various alien species new skills. And most importantly, they want to share this capability. They don't just survive, they help others survive too. They don't just solve problems, they teach others how to solve them. He straightened up, all 4 eyes bright with excitement. Therefore, my final recommendation to the board is this: we should not fear human biology. We should study it, learn from it. And most importantly, we should let humans teach us their methods. The room erupted in chaos. Some delegates were shouting questions, others were frantically taking notes, and a few were trying to get closer to Dr. Smith to ask about this mysterious coffee. The head of the Galactic Medical Board raised all 6 appendages for silence. Dr. Blue, are you suggesting we classify humans as teachers? Yes, Dr. Blue replied firmly. Their greatest biological trait isn't their healing, their strength, or even their resilience. It's their desire to help others achieve the same capabilities. But they're so scary, one delegate protested. Dr. Smith stood up then, still holding his hot chocolate. Being scary isn't always bad, he said with a smile. Sometimes it means you can protect others who can't protect themselves. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. Dr. Blue's final note in his report read, "Humans are not a problem to be solved or a threat to be contained. They are teachers waiting for students, protectors looking for those to protect, and friends eager to share their strengths. Their biology isn't wrong. It's just better than we imagined possible." The Galactic Medical Board unanimously voted to establish the first human medical academy the next day. They also installed coffee machines in every classroom, despite Dr. Blue's nervous protests. After all, if they were going to learn from humans, they might as well start with their most mysterious power source. Dr. Blue just hoped the galaxy was ready for an entire school of coffee-powered human teachers. But then again, the galaxy had survived humans this long. It could probably survive learning from them too.